Hi, everybody. Ian Bremmer here, and we've just had a couple of major negotiations in Geneva. It's very rare that you get them going kind of one right after the other with the same people leading them, Jared Kushner and Steve Witkoff, first bringing the Russians and the Ukrainians together, and secondly, negotiations with, though not directly with, the Iranians. And in both cases, outcomes underwhelming, not much progress. No one should really be surprised. Both are gaining in urgency in terms of the or else factor. On the Iranian front, that is particularly true because you have a second carrier group that is likely to arrive. They just got through the Straits of Gibraltar faster than people expected. I'm hardly understand naval transit times, but apparently will be in the Persian Gulf by Saturday or Sunday. And at that point, with all of the other assets in place, the Americans would be capable of giving a thumbs up to military strikes at any point. The Iranians are taking this seriously in the sense that they're sort of burying nuclear capabilities and have the supreme leader in a much more difficult to reach spot, so much so that the Israelis apparently would not be able to directly participate in a decapitation strike if that was ordered. But that they haven't given very much in terms of the American demands, and those demands are extensive. They include an end to uranium enrichment, the removal through a consortium of all highly enriched uranium stockpiles, an end to their ballistic missile capabilities, and an end to their support for proxies in the region. There's limited negotiation occurring on the nuclear front, but certainly nothing beyond what was seen with the original Iranian nuclear deal that the Americans stepped away from, and the Americans not willing to provide a end or significant reduction of sanctions. And while there's been some talk about ending ballistic missile testing going forward, or at least the testing of new previously untested advanced weapons, nothing else. And all of this falls way short of what Trump would consider a win, and way short, particularly given the fact that President Trump is making the argument that he doesn't think the Iranians have a fist in their glove. They have taken shots at Israel in response to previous military strikes. Indeed, after the 12-day war, no such strikes against the United States, except for a strike against the U.S. base in Qatar, where the Americans actually got an advance heads up from Iran through third countries. So if you are Trump, you believe not only from your success in Venezuela, but also from your success with the Iranians, that you can take another swing, maybe even a big swing. They're not going to negotiate on ballistic missiles. You can take them out. They're not going to negotiate on adequately on their nuclear capabilities. You can cause more damage, as the Americans did with Israel last year. That makes the Israelis more vulnerable to Iranian attacks. It potentially raises oil prices a lot. That is the lever they have. And the Iranians, it was interesting that they engaged in military exercises the same day that these negotiations were going on, which very briefly suspended traffic through the Straits of Hormuz. Clearly a message from Iran that if you hit us, we can shut down all of this oil transit. But if you do that, suddenly you make big enemies of the Gulf states that have been staying neutral through these negotiations all the way through and have been engaging diplomatically with the Iranians in trying to keep tensions comparatively low. So even there, it's not clear how much leverage the Iranians have. And of course, for that leverage to be effective, the American president and his administration have to believe that it's effective. As of right now, I don't see that at all. I don't see that from the negotiators, from Jared and from Witkoff. I don't see it from Trump. And I don't see it, frankly, from the White House, the agency, and those that are actually planning implementation. So as of right now, likelihood of strikes increasingly quite high. I would say way over 50%. And the question is whether that would be relatively constrained strikes against military and nuclear capabilities with the intention of trying again to negotiate, or would it actually be a broader strike against the regime? And that decision has not been taken by President Trump in a way that it had been against Maduro on Venezuela weeks before those military strikes actually occurred. On Russia-Ukraine, there's no such question about any American direct involvement. It's more whether or not Trump gets so sick of so impatient with his inability to get the outcome that he wants. Might he be willing to consider engaging with the Russians directly outside of a ceasefire? Because again, remember that despite the fact that the Ukrainians are the ones that are willing to accept a ceasefire with no preconditions, they've been the ones that have much more dramatically capitulated to American demands than the Russians, who have given repeatedly nothing to the U.S. Trump continues to say consistently that it is the Ukrainians that need to do more. He said this just in the last several days. They're the ones that are the obstacles to peace. They're the ones that need to get to the table, that the Russians are ready for peace. That is not true. Nobody else that's engaged with the Russians believe that, but that's where Trump wants to take this. And part of it is that clearly he sees a lot more potential benefit for the United States in engaging with the Russians, certainly economically, or at least he sees much more benefit for Trump and his family personally, even if he doesn't see it from the American perspective long term, and therefore he wants to engage. And that is making it a lot harder for the Europeans to coordinate with the United States. The Europeans, of course, continue to provide all the military support. The U.S. is willing to sell weapons to the Europeans, then go on to Ukraine, but they're not providing anything in terms of taxpayer support. That was the case a year ago. It isn't anymore. They're providing some intelligence, but otherwise that's it. And so it's the Europeans that are driving the Ukrainian military capabilities, but it's the Americans that are driving the negotiations. And this has annoyed a lot of the European governments. In fact, it's why President Macron decided to send his own national security advisor to meet with Putin and the Kremlin by himself, which went predictably absolutely nowhere. But the level of anger with the Europeans is they feel like they're supporting the Ukrainians while the Americans are more on the Russian side. And that is the sense I got from pretty much every European leader that I met with in Munich over the past several days. That's making this a lot more challenging to resolve, not only in terms of forcing the Ukrainians to capitulate to get to a ceasefire, but also what does Europe look like? What does NATO look like after a ceasefire is over? Can you trust collective security if the Russians engage in extended asymmetric warfare against frontline NATO states, or a false flag attack? Anything short of tanks rolling into the Baltics or Poland, how would you think about that future? And the Europeans increasingly thinking that NATO can't rely on the Americans, and so they need to step up to a much greater degree. So 2 sets of negotiations, not much movement, increasing urgency, and a likelihood that both of these conflicts are going to look very different in the coming weeks and months than they do right now. That's it for me. I'll talk to you all real soon.